Hi, I'm Jennifer Mendez, and welcome to today's session, our ILTA podcast on how design and research can advance your legal innovation projects. I'm really excited to have with me a great expert in this field, Nicole Bradick from Theory and Principle. Did I get that right, Nicole?
You got it all right.
Awesome. So we've talked a lot about this stuff sort of offline, but I geek out over everything. And it's incredibly important, in my opinion, and I think yours as well, that we focus on design and research and user research, right, when we roll out innovation projects. The idea that just because you build it, they will come is completely inaccurate, and there's work that needs to be done. It doesn't matter how great functionally something is, what features it has, if it's not easy to use, right? So I think we start with just the very basics for our audience. What is user experience or UX, which we'll refer to it as throughout our conversation, and why do you think it's important?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people understand UX to be sort of making software as easy as possible to use, sort of how you get somebody through whatever it is they're trying to do in the application from start to finish with the least amount of friction. But it's also sort of a process to get there. So UX kind of has two parts. One is sort of what we'll call more UX research, which is really fundamentally about like finding product market fit. So that's the process of like interviewing your users, really making sure you try to understand the problem, understand the pain points, and then sort of prototyping and testing until you get to like the perfect product market fit. And then it's the actual like once we figured out what we're building, how do we get a user to that like whatever the thing is, the goal they're trying to get to with the least amount of friction. So it's sort of both a process and a design ethos. So I
Yeah,
think yeah, it's sort of both things.
yeah, and so when we talk about that sort of thing, right? And we're not talking about design thinking per se, right? But design thinking concepts, right? Identify the problem. We can't just assume that our idea is a great idea. We need to have conversations with our users to figure out what it is that they're having problems with, what their pain points are. What do you think are the most important things to consider when thinking about the user experience?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's super common that we get calls from firms and are like, okay, we've got this thing we want to build, and it's going to do this, this, and this. And we have to say, like, okay, that's awesome. That sounds really neat, but let's back up 100 steps. Um, and so a lot of it is, making sure you understand actually who your user is, because a lot of times there you have a range of users, right? So you might be building a product to be used by your consumer finance lawyers, but you could have a consumer finance lawyer who is sort of going to be a power user and always in there, and you may have a type that is just going to come in from time to time to do like this very specific thing. So a lot of it's even about like how do we segment our users into sort of groups that make sense, and then not lump people into categories as we understand them from a business perspective or from a firm perspective. So once you understand exactly who those people are, then those are separate conversations, and separate interviews to sort of understand the need. And so I think that's kind of step one for firms, is doing that work, which a lot of firms aren't prepared or have the knowledge base to do. And then once you get to like that product, it's really that sort of product market fit. It's really about like engaging with design. A lot of firms also are like reticent or don't have the resources to have like an actual designer do the user experience, and that's when they often will rely on their engineering team. And I have employed so many fantastic developers in my career, but none of them can design software. They can't, no matter how much they'll tell you they can. And most front-end engineers will try to tell you, but they can't. And it really takes somebody who understands the discipline of user experience design to build something that's truly seamless and factor in all those different types of user segments that you have. Like, how is the experience going to be different for somebody who's sort of a novice time-to-time user? How is the staff going to use it differently from attorneys? How is an associate going to use it different from partners? And just trying to fully understand the universe of sort of use of this application so that we build the right thing.
Okay, I'm gonna sort of derail us a little bit just based on something that you said, right? So let's talk a little bit about user personas. We've got people that, as you said, maybe they're hesitant, they don't know where to start, how to start. So once you've identified your users, and in law firms, you've got sort of typical buckets, no matter what firm you're in, right? You have your timekeepers, or your partners and your associates, your of counsel. You've got all of these different roles that you identify as being potential users of your software. How many of those people do you interview? How do you identify what folks you should talk to? Like, how should our audience sort of think about those personas, and how to get started with those interviews if they're not going to trust someone with your experience?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to sort of forget about groups as we understand them. So of counsel versus partners, and think about it more of what they need out of the software, and how often they'll be coming to the software, and how experienced they are with other tools, and what other tools they're typically using, right? Those are the more important considerations, as opposed to whether or not somebody is a partner versus a or an associate. If they're all going to be using it the same way, then great. We only have one persona that we need to worry about. So sort of divorce yourself from the actual like law firm structure and titles, and think about them more as how they'll engage. And then usually we say, like, per user group, you want to have like at least 3 interviews. So 3 to 5. Over 5, there's really no reason. So 3 will get you a pretty good sense of things, assuming that you have like the right persona. But during those interviews, you might actually learn things and realize that's actually like a different type of user. So we're going to carve that person off, and interviews and user research is really all about like identifying what you need to know, and then going out and finding the right people to talk to get that answer. I think also I've seen in law firms distinct differences just between practice groups. So they may be like at the surface seem to have similar needs, but by practice group it's different, or by region. So like the IP group in New York might behave a lot differently than the IP group in San Francisco. So you really just kind of have to know. You have to know your team, and then as you're learning, sort of make critical decisions about how to separate them out. And this doesn't have to be a major undertaking. Some software is so important and so critical, like you were just talking about, like an intranet, that is so important and so mission critical that you should really engage in a deep amount of research. Some things are more like point solutions that are going to be used by like one practice group, and so it doesn't have to be a big thing. Just do some of it.
Absolutely. Always engage the users, no matter how small or insignificant you think the project is, because if you don't get it right, you will definitely hear about it.
Well, it's also like, if you're going to spend all the time and effort and money to do the thing, if you're buying the software, building software, you might as well make sure you get it right by like taking a few tiny steps that are like, in the grand scheme of like the cost of implementation and build, are so little.
Absolutely. I have found the best way to start your project, but I am biased, so I will fully admit to it. How do you think that UX design and user research improve the delivery of legal tech projects in sort of like the KM and innovation space?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is it improves adoption, right? If you are certain that what you're building or buying is something that people are going to want, if you're certain that it's something that is easy to use for people, I mean, particularly like in KM, where, forcing people to use the same system so that you have some uniformity is really important. You need to make sure everyone can use it easily, and it's not going to be a burden, right? And I think just even over the last like 3 to 5 years, lawyer standards for their software have increased. It used to be like, okay, we'll use whatever crap you give us. Fine, it's going to be awful, but we'll use it, and some will use it, some won't. But I really think the expectation has shifted dramatically to lawyers really being like regular consumers, right? And expecting, like, even if this is business software, it needs to be easy for me to use. I need to only have to create a few buttons. I can't have a ton of things that will annoy me and cause me to get out of the application. So the more you can make it have product market fit, and the more you can make it streamlined for the user, the more you'll have adoption. And then your time as a KM and innovation team will be far better spent.
I call that the Apple or the Google effect, right? Everyone wants everything to be as easy or as well designed as, your search bar in Google or your iPhone. And so it's important for us to take those things into consideration as we deliver our projects. I always point to the story where going back to an intranet launch where we were sort of really arrogant in the design. We thought this is so superior to what we had previously. It's so easy to use with elements from all the great sites and Amazon and Apple and this and that. We're not going to do training. No training necessary. We're just going to roll it out. And for as great as it was, that was a really bad idea. So you have to make sure you're having those conversations with your users and you're helping them get acclimated. With that being said, obviously you have to get users involved and you can't just roll things out. I'm a big believer in beta testing. I even joke about alpha testing. Sometimes I'll pick a really small initial group to identify the things that I haven't thought of or I've missed and then roll it out to a larger group. How should teams prepare for testing and validation with users?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on what type of research you want to get. So there's sort of different phases throughout the product life cycle of the type of research you want to do. So if you're just trying to like understand the problem that you're trying to solve, that's going to be a super open-ended user interviews. So we'll usually create some kind of script or guide to sort of, you know, make sure that we're going to get to all of the things we want to explore, but that's really like a listening exercise. That's a lob a question and sit back and just listen and kind of guide the conversation a little bit. We then have like what we call validation testing, which is, okay, we understand the problem pretty well. We think we have the right solution to that. Let's go validate and make sure that the solution is going to meet the user needs. And then also there's the added bit of, if this is a paid solution, like if we're selling it to clients, we want to make sure that it has enough value that they're going to be willing to pay for it. And that's sort of a more like, that is the conversation of an interview, but it's also a little bit more moderated where you're either giving the user access to the application or you're running through it in the conversation and getting their feedback. So that requires a little bit more planning and prep around, exactly what are we going to show them or ask them to do within the application to make sure we're going to elicit the type of things that we need to learn in that. But the validation testing is probably the most complicated type because it's a lot of psychology and a lot of sort of reading underneath what people are saying about the application. And that's something that you just get better with experience, frankly. But you can definitely prep the scripts and make sure you have the product demo where you want it to be before you go into those meetings. And the final one is what we'll call more usability testing. And that's like, okay, so we understand the user problem. We've built the right solution for that user. Now we want to make sure it's as easy as possible to get through. And so that's where you want to prepare a script of tasks. So you'll get on a call with the user. They'll be steering, and you'll say, all right, say you want to analyze this contract or pull out all the warranty clauses. What would you do? And then you shut up and you watch them do it and you have them speak out loud and they talk through it. And that's where you can observe like, oh, like they're really confused about where to go here. They went over there, which is interesting because we figured they'd go here. And then just by observing what they're doing, you can really start to understand where you can make those UX improvements. But that's probably the most like controlled, scripted type of research. So you'll want to prepare a lot for like a script of tasks that you want to give to the user. And I'll just say also that validation testing is super helpful for innovation teams, particularly where we have partners with lots of ideas. And then you need to be able to go back to the partner and say like, great idea, but nobody wants it. Doing that validation testing really gives you the data you need to be able to have that conversation. Or amazing, great idea, everyone wants it, everyone wants to throw money at this, we validated it, let's build it. But it lets you kind of like weed out all of the different ideas that you're getting and requests you're getting from partners throughout the organization.
That's the point where I say, this is where you call people like Nicole to help you out so that you can have those tough conversations and say, it's not me. Results indicate. I think
yes,
we'll great, but
yeah, we'll do that for you. Don't worry. We'll be the bad guy.
All right. So, I mean, I think all of this has been great. What would you say, what advice would you give the audience on how to get started on their UX journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think just understanding, even like most innovation teams just need like a super high level basic understanding of user experience design. Like you don't need to be an expert. You don't need to have an expert on your team. Although when it comes to designing the product, you do need a designer. But I think everyone can benefit, whether they're buying or building, especially like the buyers who don't think they really need to think about UX. But whether you're buying or building, just having a baseline understanding is super helpful. And there's like a ton of stuff online you can find. Nielsen Norming Group is a great resource. We actually are also launching a resources page on our site, I think next week, that will have like our sort of overview of the heuristics that you need to think about. We're also a little preview slash plug. We're launching a little online course. So we do a lot of workshops for firms to teach them like UX 101 for innovation teams and KM teams. So we're turning that into like an online format as well. So that'll be available soon. And the whole idea is like, we're not going to make you a designer at the end, but we want you to be able to look at something and say, that's not right. And I can tell you why that's not right. So somebody who knows what they're doing, go fix it.
Absolutely. I think that is great. Just because I feel like I can't have any conversation without mentioning AI these days. I'm going to throw you one last one before we wrap up. It seems like everyone wants Gen AI in some way, shape, or form, whether or not it's right for the project. Everyone just wants to be able to type a question into a bot and get a response or generate a document or whatever it is. What can you tell us about the importance of UX as it relates to AI tools?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of sort of talks and workshops on this exact thing because truly Gen AI has created, a bit of a shift in the UX universe because it's fundamentally different interaction with the system, right? You have no control over what the system is doing as a user. You have a lot of like unknowns about like, where's the data coming from? Where's it going? What's the quality of my responses? So there's a lot more to think about as a builder regarding user experience. And I think when this all came out like 18 months ago or so, the firms who were sort of ahead of the curve were building chatbots as well as the vendors in the legal tech space were all just sort of adding a chatbot widget, not really thinking too much about sort of value, but really trying to get that headline. And I think that we're sort of now way past that phase of like, let's just throw a chatbot up and having, users and vendors and buyers really want something that's going to actually add value. So I think there's two fundamental things that I just like to get across right now. Number one is the chatbot's not your only option if you're using generative AI or an LLM. In fact, there's a lot of use cases where just like the standard sort of point and click user interface is going to be the right interface no matter what technology you're using. A chat UI is actually the most difficult UI for a user. It puts a lot of cognitive load on the user. I think that there's an impression that it's easier because you're just typing stuff, but it is actually the most challenging. It's the most flexible, but definitely the most challenging. So to the extent you can control the user's experience by adding more like point and click filtering type, graphic user interface elements, the better it's going to be for your user. And then the other thing that I like to get across is that when we are building these systems, we need part of the user experience analysis now has to be how much information do we need to give the users as they're walking through things. So the more flexible the system, the more we need to tell them things about this is what to expect with respect to sort of accuracy, with respect to, where your data is going, where it's coming from. Like there's a lot more information you have to give the user so that they can feel like they have a little bit more control over their experience.
Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We are going to add Nicole's website URL to the description in this podcast so that you can go look at those resources and even get more information about that course. Nicole, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I always love talking to you. I appreciate it, and I hope everyone enjoyed the session.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.